Grüß, willkommen in einem Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 3 of my figure gaming video series. In this video I'll provide a basic overview of what type of playing area you may require and how to lay it out. As I come from a metric country, I prefer to use centimetres, but for some reason most players use imperial measurement. As a result, I'll use feet instead of centimetres. However, just multiply all values by 30 to arrive at a metric value if you don't like this. First question to ask is, what type of playing area do you wish? There are three basic types: a ground sheet, a terrain sheet, or physical sheet. The last is my name for playing areas which cannot be folded or rolled. The ground sheet, which was in simple terms a sheet of felt or appropriately coloured thick cotton, was the first type of terrain I ever used. It was cheap, simple and quick to set up, but it lacked realism. Players would normally place books under the sheet to represent hills. Area and linear terrain was created by the use of felt, with the correct colours obviously. Players would add trees, buildings and more elaborate terrain as was required. In many cases, if a sufficient extra terrain pieces were added, it could look very good, as you can see with this Napoleonic game. This type of playing area suited large, ancient or Napoleonic games, especially if the playing area is large as well. The next type of playing area, the terrain sheet, or battle map, is basically a ground sheet which has been produced far more professionally. These are normally rubber-backed and made of a type of plastic which is rough, similar to a mouse mat. The major advantage is storage. You can roll these up and place them under the bed or in the cupboard. Depending on the size, I would be easily able to transport it with a typical playing area of 4x6 rolling up into a 4-foot long roll. It's also easy to set up. You simply unroll the battle map on your table. An amazing amount of detail can be placed onto a battle map, such as streams and roads, as well as some 3D effects. These would need to be custom made, but once you have a battle map, you can roll it up for storage and keep on reusing it. While some terrain can be permanently embedded into a playing area, as we'll see later, a lot of terrain features should not. If you embed a road or stream, you immediately limit the battle maps available to use with different scales. So roads, which are 3 centimetres wide, would mean your preferred scale is probably 15mm, and 6mm figures would probably look a bit odd. 1 centimetre wide roads suitable for 6mm may not be suitable for 15mm. Hills can be created by cutting suitable pieces or size pieces of terrain sheet of the battle map, as can be seen here. You could also purchase plastic moulded hills, which I'm showing some examples here as well. While this is not a battle map and uses instead a ground sheet, the terrain pieces that you see here could be used on a battle map. The major issue with battle maps is matching the terrain features with the battle map. This shows a battle map with terrain pieces. The battle map has nice textures, although the terrain features are less than that attractive, especially the road. I have real difficulty finding any pictures of 6mm playing areas using battle maps, so I'm wondering if it's difficult to obtain battle maps optimized for 6mm figures. If you have a optimally sized battle map with embedded terrain features such as rivers and roads, placed in a universal manner, then a player could only needs a single battle map to meet most of their needs. Built-up areas, hills and wooded areas are added as required. Extra roads could be added, but I find that most roads which you place on a playing area don't look so good, or at least on a battle map don't really look that good. So I would minimize this as much as possible and rely on the embedded roads in the battle map. Players who lacked room and who focus on a single type of gaining would find battle maps with terrain features the optimal solution. This would probably suit gaming areas of up to 4 feet by 6 feet. Let's now move to the final version of playing area, game boards. Game boards, as the name implies, cannot be folded and are made up of reasonably solid material. This shows a rather large playing area for a game of FFT3 using exercise mats. You can see the exercise mats are joined together using a zipper type arrangement. While game boards vary a great deal, the main benefit is that they can look very good. Because most game boards have to be handmade, the terrain features which go on top of them can be made to match the playing area. In this case, the streams are embedded and some of the removed exercise mat material is used as hills, which is glued onto this playing area. One point I really do need to make: game boards are not diorama. The ultimate expression of this type of terrain is the creation of realistic terrain pieces to place static figures on top of. That is not a playing area, and players need to always ask themselves how practical is the terrain to play an actual game on, which is not just a simple skirmish game. I must admit, something like this could be used for a skirmish game of some description. But as I'm talking about 6mm figures using a scale of at least 1 in 1000 and more likely 1 in 5000 scale, this terrain is not suitable for that type of gaming. At the practical but still highly realistic level, we could consider something like this. I assume this is made from spray foam and is contoured in a realistic manner. The terrain scale looks like it's about 1 in 1000, so this would be suitable for a skirmish set of rules. This is beautiful, but as you may have already worked out, the problem with this terrain is how do you store and transport it? It's possible this is a single piece mounted in a frame. If you can create and leave this set up permanently, then it is an option for you, but it's not an option that I possess. One other option is using the GHQ hex-based terrain system. Each hex can be moulded and cut to create whatever terrain you wish. These can then be joined together to create whatever overall playing area you wish. Personally, I feel this system would only work for small playing areas, let's say 2 by 2 feet. Trying to assemble a 3 by 4, much less than a 4 by 6 foot playing area, would simply take too long. Other companies offer a large hex, which may be more practical, but one issue with this system is the joins. The joins do detract from the terrain. The advantage of this system is it's very flexible and easy to store. The disadvantage is setup time and a lot of lines detracting from the terrain experience. GHQ also offers a micro skirmish playing board, which offers very nice terrain in what looks like a 45cm by 90cm playing area, or perhaps 2 by 3 feet. Two can be joined together to form a larger playing area. The advantage is very quick setup time and good looking terrain. The disadvantage is storage, although if you only had one, it's not an issue, and its ability to transport is also not a big issue as well. Now we come to a tile-based system, in this case using 1 foot square tiles. This also has joins, which detracts from the terrain experience, but they're not as numerous as hexes. One big advantage is storage is easy. In this case, 12 tiles can be stored in a single box, which makes transport easy. Setup times is not as quick as a battle map, but quick enough if the tiles are correctly labelled. Some flexibility could also exist. Tiles could be swapped around, for example. The disadvantage is weight and those damn lines, which really detracts from the terrain. One way you could reduce the weight issue is, in this case, these are double cork tiles. You could use single cork tiles and the weight problem does reduce, but you still end up with those lines between the tiles. This shows a much better quality version of the tile system using much larger tiles. If the game boards are well made and the join issue can be minimized, and if they are large, you have far less of them, so the minimization becomes a lot easier. The major takeaway here is that this is an example of a flat game board using tiles. Each tile is flat and can be stacked together for storage. Contoured terrain, while beautiful to look at, is very difficult to store. The question players need to answer is, how much storage do I have? This will tell them how detailed the terrain that they should consider, especially if they want to contour the terrain. My personal preference is any terrain needs to be player friendly. Thus, I like contoured hills and flat-topped built-up areas. Saying that, I do have a resin built-up areas, which I could use instead, and only when an enemy element occupies the built-up area would I replace it with a flat-top built-up area. As for woods, I use MDF wooded areas which have foliage glued on top of it or embedded on top of it. Once you've selected your optimal playing area type, you need to consider the size of your playing area. This could affect the former decision. The first point to consider is physical limitation. A standard height person can bend over a table and move an element up to 90 centimeters from the table edge. This means any playing area must not have any spot further than 90 centimeters from any edge. It must be remembered a playing area may be on a table which needs to be larger, so 90 centimetres represents an absolute maximum. This represents the largest possible playing area, and this is anything but practical. Players would need to remain standing for the entire game, and once the fighting moved into the other half of the playing area, the player would need to move to the opposing player edge. This is possible, but anything but practical. Using a 6x4 foot playing area, we begin to approach a highly practical playing area size. While a player cannot reach the furthest tile, they can reach the bulk of the playing area. This is possibly the most practical, largest playing area. I should note the length can be greater than 6 feet, but once that occurs, it's impossible for a player to reach into the opposing player's closest row without moving into the opposing player's edge of the playing area. As a result, I will suggest this represents the maximum size, even in terms of length, unless of course you're going to have multiple players per side. The only issue with this is all the players still need to remain standing for the entire game. This player is even more optimal. Both players can reach the entire playing area from their player edge. If playing along the long axis, players would be positioned on the flanks, but could still reach the entire playing area. This properly represents a playing area's sweet spot, and most players would probably need to aim for this size playing area. If play was along the short axis, then the length would be much greater than 90, or could be much greater than 90 centimetres. In this case, I would assume there are more players on each side, if this is the case. If players wish to remain seated, then their maximum reach reduces to 60 centimetres, which is what the yellow circle represents here. In this case, a player can reach 2 tiles while seated, and only needs to stand if they want to reach over to the third row. The 3x2 foot playing area is the sweet spot for players who wish to remain seated for the entire game. A player could remain seated and reach the entire playing area. 2 edges may require a little bit of stretching and be able to reach 15 centimetres beyond each flank. I mean, they can reach 15 centimetres beyond each flank. This would allow a player to keep rules, charts and tables, reinforcements and other game aids all within easy reach while remaining seated. If players wanted to avoid standing, this is the optimal playing area. One caveat, most players are not 60 centimetres deep and are instead between 70 centimetres and 80 centimetres deep. Thus, each player could find a 5 to 10 centimetre gap from the playing edge to the playing area. So there may have to be some standing if you wanted to reach right over to the opposing player edge. The 2x2 foot playing area used by DBA players is similar to the 3x2 foot playing area, except the player can reach further into each flank. This allows that player even more player aids to be within reach. Unless a player is using 2 foot squares, and they need to use it because of the rules, I prefer the 2x3 foot playing area. If you do need to reduce it to a 2x2 foot square, just block off the part of the playing area you don't need. Also note, there is probably going to be a 5 to 10 centimetre gap from the player edge to the playing area edge as well, so always factor that in. If you're going down the path of game boards, an optimal solution is to use 2x3 foot MDF playing areas, 4 of which can be the largest or can create the largest possible practical playing area. If using 30 centimetre or 1 foot square tiles, then 6 are required for each 2x3 foot playing area. If using 2 foot square tiles, you cannot divide the playing area in this manner. You end up with 2x3 tiles, each of which is a 2 foot square. If using a battle map, then 2 3x4 foot battle maps is all you need to reproduce this. Players using a cover sheet do not need to concern themselves with this video from this point on. Using this size, players should always play along the short axis, and this suits 2 players per side. Using this size playing area, and there are 2 players per side, so each player probably would need a road running from player edge to player edge. This represents the player's line of advance in a fluid scenario. In most cases, a mobile attack follows a path which allows access to the formation's supply column, which would normally be heavily loaded trucks, which often lack all-wheel drive. Thus, they need some sort of road or at least flat terrain to travel along. Should be noted, most rules do not really use roads for more than a mark to place built-up areas on and provide some minor movement benefits, which rarely have any major effect. Thus, road position mainly affects where you can place built-up areas. However, some rules do use roads for supply and victory condition purposes. As a result, some thought needs to go into their positioning. In a desert or steppe situation, there would be few roads, but I'll primarily look at Europe where the road network is much denser. To add some interest and complexity, each player could have a second road running from player edge to player edge, but this road would cross over in the playing area. This means a player could drive up a secondary road to avoid the main defences, but then discover he has to swing back to the centre. A player could also run up a flank that does not have any roads, with the objective of swinging around and cutting off the defender's forces. This arrangement allows for tiles to be swapped around, but players could redesign it to suit their own particular requirements. We can now add a road running from flank to flank. While not essential, a road running across either player row is a good idea. These can exit each flank as well. As indicated, this arrangement allows for swapping of tiles. If players do not care about swapping tiles, then they could create their own roads running from any point on a flank to any point on a flank. One major benefit of a road, pretty much for any set of rules, is it can be used to identify objectives. This shows possible objectives that we could use for orders or victory conditions. Now, what I've been showing you so far is linear roads, sort of in a stylized manner. The roads would be made in a more natural form, as you can see in this particular case. The other terrain features which I normally embed into any playing area is a river or stream. I've attempted many water feature layouts, and this is one possible option for this sized playing area. Again, as I indicated earlier, this layout is specifically designed for up to 2 players per side and is played along the short axis. This layout also allows play along the long axis. The central road does swing around a lot, but there is a central road indicating the line of a potential advance. If that playing area is too large, we can now split the playing area into 2 3-by-foot playing areas, which in this case are designed to be played along the long axis. As you can see here, it's also possible to play along the short axis. If that playing area is still considered to be too large, we can split that playing area and end up with 4 2-by-3-foot playing areas, each of which is different. These can be played along the long axis, as you can see here, or alternatively, and this is what I would recommend, is that you would play along the short axis as well. What I've just showed you is only a suggested standard terrain structure. Players can create whatever standard terrain layout they wish. Many players do not embed roads and rivers into the terrain, while others use historical playing areas. Whatever works for you is all you need to achieve, but the layout depicted has been slowly pieced together after a lot of playtesting, and it seems to work for most of my ad hoc games, as well as giving me a reasonable amount of variety. For historical games, I typically create custom playing areas. For example, this image shows the Battle of Marengo, with the Austrians just launching their attack. The only issue I have with custom historical playing areas is storage and effort. My small Leipzig playing area is shown here, and once I've played the scenario for a while, I typically move on to another battle. The result is the playing area is stored away, never to be used again. To avoid this, I use these playing areas for ad hoc games on a random basis. Leipzig is an unusual playing area, but I've used it for World War II, Cold War, and even ancient and ad hoc games. However, if you lack the room to store a dozen historical playing areas, the best solution is to create 1 or 2 standard playing areas and just stay with that. This is an example of a 90cm by 120cm or 3-by-4 standard playing area. In this case, the water features have not been embedded. This playing area has edges and is a tray. This is to ensure my figures do not fall off. I normally place this on a narrow table so the edges protrude from the table. I also have standard playing areas without edges. On one side I only have the roads, on the other I include embedded water features. The reason why I have one side without water features is to allow me to use them to create simulated historical playing areas. Using felt, I create whatever water features I require to get as close as possible to a historical playing area. In this example, I've used my standard playing area to simulate Marengo. It's not perfect, but it does work if you don't have the ability to store large amounts of custom-made historical playing areas. In my case, I use three types of this style of terrain. Tiles, either 30 centimetres square or 1 foot square or 60 centimetres square, insulation boards, which is 120 by 80 centimetres, and MDF sheets, each of which are 90 by 60 centimetres or 2 by 3, or in some rare cases 90 by 120 centimetre pieces. The insulation sheet option was an accident. Recently a player shared a photo of his terrain tiles, which approaches my 2 by 3 foot size, and was made out of some type of insulation board. I'm uncertain exactly what it was, but I found something called acoustic pine wood, which is very light and comes in a 120 by 80 centimetre sections. I create two pieces and join them together, and it works very well. It's light, very light, firm, and a very good size for most games. This shows a picture of the tiles from the gamer who contacted me. I think this looks good and is ideal for gaming. I would mainly use a single tile for many games, as I normally play with rules which use a scale of 1 in 10,000 and 1 in 20,000 to give me a good game, or alternatively I use a maximum of 2 of these tiles in order to give me a game. If using 90 by 60 centimetre tiles, which is 3 by 2 foot, the roads do not have to be as grid-light in my example, and can adopt a more random flow as long as the roads enter and exit at prescribed spots to allow you to join these tiles or sheets of MDF. The acoustic tiles do not have the depth which allows me to make deep streams or rivers. That is, I can't embed it in, but I suspect I can do a shallow one or just mark it out using paint in order for me to see where the river is, which is what I ended up doing. This reflects one idea on deploying terrain when the scenario is depicting a mobile situation. A prepared attack against prepared defences could be against any terrain with the defenders possessing significant natural defences. Those are best covered with historical scenarios. Typically, in a mobile situation, an attacker will normally follow terrain which allows his supply columns to get supply to his units, which could be a road, trail, track, or just flat ground, which allows for supply trucks to travel over easily. This would represent the centre of the playing area, which is where we place our road. On the flanks, you would expect terrain such as rivers, forests, or rough or broken hills or terrain. The centre, as well as containing the most road network, would also contain the bulk of the built-up areas. The flanks would contain less roads and less built-up areas. Once we have our playing area set out with fixed roads and water features, we can now deploy the remaining terrain. Built-up areas would be placed along the roads, especially wherever a road crosses a water feature or a crossroad. The woods would be placed along the rivers. The density would be determined by the region the battle was occurring in. Finally, the hills would be placed between the water features. If this was an attacker versus defender scenario, you could identify 3 objectives, one in the centre and one on each flank, 1 foot offset from the centre line. If the attacker comes in from the right, the main line of advance would be along the central road, as seen here. The attacker could focus on the side road, as you can see here. If the attacker comes up the central road, the attacker will need to cross 2 water features, but hills and woods can be avoided. For the attacker to take all 3 objectives, 3 water features will need to be crossed. If play occurs across the short axis, the same general flow would occur, except there is more opportunity for flank attacks. The only other change is the attacker expected advance distance would not be as great. Thus the force mixes will be a bit more even. A 1.5 to 1 attack or ratio or combat strength ratio would be suitable for this type of playing area. This video only provides a suggested framework for ad hoc games. I am certain there are many more viable frameworks which players can adopt, but I must admit I have found significant difficulty in arriving one which consistently works for me. And so we come to an end of part 3 of my figure gaming series video, in this case selecting and creating your playing area. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.